Okay, well, welcome to another episode of Work the Program podcast. I'm here with Pastor Mark Isaacs. My name is Rufus Howe.
Today we're going to be discussing the two kingdoms ethic. What is it? It's leftovers. This previous Sunday was the seventh Sunday after the Epiphany, and we have an example of Jesus teaching the Sermon on the Plain. Now, most of us know about the Sermon on the Mount, which is St. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Well, that's on top of a mountain. This one is on the plain. And the idea is he's a new Moses. He goes up on a mountain. He prays, receives information from God, brings it down the hill and gives it to the people. So in Luke, it's a Sermon on the Plain. And it's an epitome of the teachings of Jesus. Now, these are logia, little sayings, and it's really thick and heavy. And unfortunately, on a Sunday morning, even if you do a long sermon, like 45 minutes, you can't even scratch the surface. So that's what this podcast is for. We serve leftovers here. So here we have some leftovers. Now, in the middle of this reading from last Sunday, it's St. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. You can look it up and follow along on your own at home. It's this saying. It's verse number 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Now, of course, what is that? That's the golden rule. The golden rule. And the golden rule is, you can find the golden rule in Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, the Sikh religion. It's a universal ethical principle. And I would joke during the sermon, I said, I used to teach business ethics. And when you teach business ethics, you don't have to do any case studies. You could just say the golden rule, and you can all go home now and get an A. So if people practice the golden rule, it's an excellent ethic. It's a good, useful thing for normal people. Now, here's the problem. It goes on to say things like, if someone takes your coat, give it to them. If they take your money, give them that. God is the judge, and don't expect. So is there more information on this? Yes. Jesus does not want you to be a doormat for people to abuse you. So, in Christian theology / philosophy over the centuries, a concept called the two kingdoms ethic emerged. And where does this come from? St. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo. Stop the recorder right now and go run home and read this. The City of God, written around the year 410, 420 AD, when Alaric and the Visigoths sacked Rome. Pagans said the reason Rome got sacked by the pagans is that we gave up on the old-time Greco-Roman religion and we embraced the wimp religion of Christianity. So St. Augustine writes this 22-volume book, big, thick book. And one of his concepts is the city of God, the city of man. And from that, we get the two kingdoms ethic. So what does that mean? Here's what it means. This is my gladius. Pretty nice. It's a stage prop. It's pretty good. Now, all Christians are citizens of two kingdoms. Right? Rufus, you're in two kingdoms. I'm in two kingdoms. What is it? It's the kingdom of God, the city of God, the city of man. We're a member of two kingdoms. Now, how does this work? One sword is borne by the government or the state, right? And what is this? This is law and order. God is the God of good order. So God gives us the law so that we may live live peaceably with even our non-Christian relatives or neighbors. So it's the government. And who bears the sword? The secular government bears the sword. Secular government. This is almost like separation of church and state concept. And what is the role of the secular government? To establish justice in the land. And what does justice mean? Well, if you take something like the Ten Commandments, somebody murders somebody, you arrest the accused, you have a due process, you have a fair trial, and the punishment is doled out. And if the punishment happens to be the death penalty, who carries it out? The state carries it out with the sword. The state also has the power to make war. And what is that for? Well, to defend your boundaries or defend the citizens living in your secular country. And again, this doesn't have to be religious. And so the king or the monarch or the government maintains good order. And on you lower it down a little, in the family, the father maintains good order within the household. And so the state and the family, they all work together, and the goal is to prevent evil, punish wrongdoers, punish evildoers, and keep the demonic powers at bay. All right, I like to think of, remember in 1965, they had a power outage in New York City, and what happened? The place went crazy. Massive looting, burning, all kinds of bad stuff, nefarious activity. All you have to do is to shut off the electricity, and that's the thin line that's holding us back from total anarchy. So as a Christian, I'm happy that the government has police and a sheriff and a military to bear the sword so I don't have to. That's their duty and their job. Now, what's the other kingdom? The other kingdom is over here. The other kingdom is the kingdom of the church. And what does the church do? The church is in charge of eternal things. So the state is in charge of temporal things, things down here. The church is in charge of eternal things. And that sword is a spiritual sword. So it's spiritual sword and an actual sword. That's the difference. And within the kingdom of the church or the city of God, the church has a very important task. It administers the sacrament, holy baptism, holy communion. We offer the forgiveness of sins. And when Jesus talks about things on the Sermon on the Plain, like turn the other cheek, do unto others if others do unto you, this is the realm this is the spiritual realm, right? And let me give some examples of this. Suppose that some criminal murdered one of your relatives, and you, in your heart, as a Christian, you forgive that person for murdering your relative. Okay? Now, which domain does that fall into? The forgiveness that you offer someone who murdered one of your relatives. Who does that?
I think that would, it seems to be both, actually.
Well, it's the spiritual sword over here, right? Mm-hmm. So just because you forgive someone who did you evil does not mean that they're exempt from the state's penalty. So you still have a debt to society to pay. So you can forgive the person that murdered your relative,
right?
But they still have to face a judge and be tried with first, second, third degree murder, manslaughter, whatever.
Right.
And so you can forgive the person, and you should forgive the person, because we know that if you don't forgive people, then it like eats you up, it eats you alive. So it's healthy for you as a victim to forgive people that have done you wrong. However, that doesn't exempt the person from the kingdom of this world, or the government still has a duty to have a trial and to punish that person or find the person not guilty. A due process of law.
And so and the reason for my answer that way was from a purely human standpoint.
Yes.
You're forgiving them from the spiritual kingdom,
mm-hmm.
with the comfort knowing that the government will exact justice.
Well, people get these two kingdoms mixed up all the time. They think that just because you forgive the person, that the person gets to walk. Right. No, there's still a debt to society.
Right.
And the two kingdoms ethic it's a powerful idea.
I think it greases the skids, because if you believe that forgiveness is from God, mm-hmm. and that's something that you should be doing, mm-hmm. it also makes you comfortable knowing that, okay, I forgive them, but the story isn't over.
That's right. Yeah, and it would be, I mean, what kind of a world would you live in if oh, never mind, it's okay, we forgive you.
Right.
No, we're not doormats, right? Mm-hmm. And on a personal level, yeah, forgive the person, but the state is the one that bears the sword. And what else does the state do? It protects private property rights, okay? So here, Jesus says things like, if someone takes your coat, give it to them. If someone takes your money, give it to them, and don't expect to get it back, and so on. Well, that's spiritual. That's good, right? However, that doesn't, again, it doesn't exempt the state. So if someone robs you, they take your cell phone, let's say. You can forgive the person, but it's up to the state to recover the cell phone or arrest the person for larceny or whatever and have a punishment. So people get that mixed up all the time, right? And it's important to keep things in the two separate categories. And Jesus, his ethics are easier to understand if you understand the two kingdoms ethic. Jesus is talking about eternal things. He's talking about the sword, the spiritual sword. He's not talking about, again, the city of man or the governments of this world. And that's a very important distinction. And people get that mixed up all the time. It goes back to what I was talking about last week, that Jesus is not a political military Messiah. He is the suffering servant. So the church does its work over on this side. The state does this work over here. Now, you can do all kinds of variations on this. Can a Christian participate in a war?
Yes.
Okay, how? Make the argument.
The argument is that you have your Christian beliefs, but you are in service to the state or the country.
Yeah. So, in other words, if there's who's responsible under our system for the sword of this world? The president and the United States military or something, right? And so, as a Christian, you are doing your duty to protect life, liberty, and property in good order by participating in a war. Now, St. Augustine also talks about just war. What is a just war anyway? Just war is a very important ethical principle. Are we allowed to invade Canada because we like Molson beer and maple syrup and chainsaws? The answer is no, right? And why is that? Because a war of conquest is not a just war, because you're stealing other people's property and taking their lives. So what Putin did in the Ukraine, that's not a just war, right? Now, if you are defending your life, liberty, and property, that is a just cause. So that's why we have the Department of Defense, right? They changed the name after World War II from the Department of War to Department of Defense, because defense is a just war. So before you go off to war and get all support it, you will have to ask yourself, is it a just war? And a just war also has a limit to it. So what does that mean? When the enemy surrenders, you stop there. You don't wipe out the enemy and all their families and destroy their economy just because you can. So a just war has an end to it. And the goal is to establish peace, not to establish conquest or domination over your enemy. So this is where it says, love your enemy, okay? That it's related to that concept.
You're reminding me of when I have been engaged in conversation with mainly non-Christian believers.
Yeah.
They will inevitably bring up, well, there's been more people killed in the name of Christ than anywhere in the world, and I think we're kind of in this area.
All right. Well, let me talk about that objection first. Is that true? No. Okay. And people look at things like the Spanish Inquisition, right? They love to wave the Spanish Inquisition in your face. We think about 15,000 people were killed in the Spanish Inquisition, right? Over, say, a 100-year period. In the 20th century alone, is Hitler an atheist? Yes, he is. Is Mao an atheist? Yes, he is. Is Stalin and Lenin atheists? Yes, they are. We killed between 140 and 430 million people. It's not even close. But yet, people conveniently overlook the slaughter and mayhem of the 20th century because they want to look back and try to accuse Christ and accuse Christianity. Christianity, on a whole, has brought peace and harmony. And where it did lead to a war, the big war in Europe is 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War. and most people don't know anything about it. It's completely forgotten. We know about World War I and World War II. The 30 Years' War, 1/3 of the population of the German-speaking territories were killed before Germany was united, right? And it was Protestants against Catholics, except for France. They're always on the wrong side of every war. They fought on the side of the Protestants, even if they're a Catholic country, because they don't like the Habsburg. It's a long story. Peace is something, just war theory should lead to you to do soul searching and say, is this leading toward peace? Is there an end to this thing? Is it a just war? Is it an invasion? So you have to do soul searching before you engage in it. And in our republic, we are allowed to vote and make our opposition known to whatever war the government happens to be in at the time, right? So there is a role for peacemaking. However, is Jesus an absolute pacifist? The answer is no, right? Many people who are Quakers or on the religious left would make the accusation that Jesus is an absolute pacifist. He's not, right? What did Jesus do? He cleansed the temple. He drove out the money changers. That's an act of violence, isn't it? And so the just war theory is based on people like St. Augustine and Protestants in general reflecting and thinking about what is the means of war. Again, war, the power to make war is over here on the state side. So it's extremely important. And the goal is good order, protection of private property, protection of life, a limit, right? Minimize civilian casualties, that sort of thing. When Jesus does the Sermon on the Plain or the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about spiritual things on this side. He's not making a general political statement. So we have to be careful when we read this that we don't blur the distinction, right? Proper distinctions are really important, like the separation of church and state. So you want the church to do its thing and you want the state to do its thing over here, and they complement each other. It brings harmony and balance. The church has an obligation and a duty to teach ethical and moral behavior, pray for the politicians and the soldiers if they do end up going to war. We also need to support families, because family is under the realm of the temporal, of this world. We want to live in peace and harmony and raise our children in peace and harmony, and that means good order. God is a God of good order. It's a very important theme.
There's an interesting bridge. I mean, in the United States anyway, on our currency it says, "In God we trust."
Yeah, what does that mean?
It must mean that I would think that the forefathers of this country wanted to ensure that the country was based on spiritual principles and a set of morals and values that were consistent with their own beliefs.
"In God We Trust" was added by Teddy Roosevelt on the coinage.
Oh.
And when in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag we say "one nation under God," that was added in the 1950s as an anti-communist dig. So the idea of one nation under God is a fairly recent addition, you know. And what does that mean? If you poll people, maybe 85% of the American public say they believe in God. What does that mean? It's God in general. It's not Holy Trinity God. It's not divinity of Christ. They believe in God in general. You know, like the force be with you. A smaller percent. Christianity is the largest religion in the United States, but we would say through faith in Christ or something, or, you know, to the glory of Jesus or something. Mm-hmm. In God we trust is a very general term, right? It's important, I think, to have on the money, but it's not Trinitarian Christian or anything.
It doesn't really satisfy the deepest spiritual kingdom.
No, it's a vague statement that everybody agrees with.
That's interesting.
Usually when the politicians get on TV, they talk about their deep faith in God and that they're taking bribes, you know, and, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of a God. It's a political thing, you know. Right. And does the state do this? Yeah. The state will use God and invoke God, you know. God is on our side, that sort of thing. And so the church has to be careful to say, well, we need to pray for our enemies, and even if they don't worship the same God we do, we need to have mercy on them when they surrender. Don't annihilate them. No, ethnic cleansing things, that sort of thing. Those are international war crimes, right?
Interesting.
And where does that come from, the international war crimes? It comes from the Red Cross, right? It's based in Switzerland, and there was a hellacious battle in northern Italy, I think in the 1870s, and a Swiss businessman traveled through, and they didn't have medical care for the soldiers on each side. If you got injured, they just leave you there on the field. So the Red Cross develops out of a way to care for injured soldiers on the battlefield because it's humane, right? And that's a church function. The state doesn't care. They just want to win the battle, and they don't mind leaving the debris behind. Well, the Red Cross cleans up the mess.
That's an example of people following their belief system to
Yes.
know what's right and wrong. And
Acting on, love your enemy. That's what Jesus says. So it means you take care of them when you try to alleviate human suffering. When the state makes a mess, the church has to step in and clean up the mess. That's our job.
Right.
You know?
The very obvious one also is the turn the other cheek.
Yeah, what does that mean? Again, it sounds like you're supposed to be a doormat or something, right? Mm-hmm. Well, again, if somebody is assaulting you, the husband beats the wife. So Jesus is not in favor of wife beating, right? So people that are enemies of Christ, or they misunderstand what that saying means, they try to tell you the way you're supposed to act, turn the other cheek as they're abusing you, and that's not what it means. Yes, turn the other cheek and forgive the person that's beating you, but you go to the police and report the incident so that they can put a stop to that, because they're taking advantage of you in a weakened condition. So in other words, they're using the law to try to perpetuate abusing people, and that's not Jesus is not in favor of abuse. Mm-hmm.
What does then turning the other cheek look like if you were in a situation where you were being, verbally abused or whatever?
All right, it's up to every Christian to be a peacemaker. So let's do a road rage incident. Somebody cuts you off with the car. Do you get out of the car and bang on the windshield and try to challenge the person into a fist fight that then escalates into gunplay? The answer is no. There's a horrible story that happened in Norman, Oklahoma. Some guy who's like 63 went out to get a cup of coffee, and he got in a road rage incident. Everybody has guns down there. He shot and killed the other guy. I think got a cup of coffee, and somebody, well, it's up to Christians to be peacemakers. Don't go around all wound up tight, wanting to fight people all the time. And that's a lot of people do that. They have so much aggravation that they go out. Ishmael, at the beginning of Moby Dick, he's walking in Manhattan looking for somebody. He wants to knock their hat off to get in a fight because to vent his energy, mm-hmm. right? And so the role of the police is to make sure that, and you, as a peacemaker, you need to diffuse the situation. Find a solution rather than violence. Mm-hmm. Don't resort to violence first.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And most people, that's their first thing they do. They go for the tire iron. They go for the violence rather than saying, well, let's talk this thing out and maybe we can negotiate something, or.
Right. I'm reminded of the verse that calls us to be slow to anger.
Yeah, that's what that means. Be level-headed and calm. Mm-hmm. Most of the world, they're angry, they're raging, especially like in recent days. It seems like, COVID or something made people really, they're like a bubble with their iPhone, and they drive in their car all by themselves and they're raging. It doesn't take, people have a short fuse out there. Mm-hmm. And it's up to us to try to say, well, let's, just knock it off and break up fights and that kind of thing. And the Geneva Convention, that grows out of the Red Cross also. And what's the Geneva Convention? If you think of the attack that Hamas did on the kibbutz in Israel, okay, what did they do? It's not a declared war. It was a terrorist sneak attack. They killed women and children and non-combatants. They took hostages, and they put the hostages in front of video cameras and coerced them to make statements. And when they finally were released, they made a big festival out of it to humiliate these people as they were being turned over. All of that is a violation of international law. And they're international war crimes, like the Nazis at Nuremberg, right? You can't do that. And where does that come from? It comes from an ethic of love your neighbor. It comes from an ethic of just war. It comes from an ethic of limit what you do. It comes, and it's the voice of the church that says, be humane, have a truce, stop fighting, talk it through, don't resort to violence first. The world does violence, and it's up to ethical people to stop and say, let's figure out a way to resolve this peacefully and humanely, right? Extremely important, right? Under the sword comes economics, and it's stations and vocations in life. So one of the things that Martin Luther talked about, it's called the priesthood of all believers. So in the Middle Ages, people thought that priests, monks, and nuns are called to their vocation, and everyone else was a second-class citizen. With Luther, he honors work, and stations and vocations, your job, your career, is a beautiful thing. It's a part of good order, part of the kingdom of this world. And why is that a good thing? When people are fully employed, when they make money, they can provide for their family, and you have stable families and stable homes. It's a building block for a just society. And so the whole realm of economics and political discussions, whether it's a monarchy or a republic or democracy or whatever system of government you have, Christianity transcends that and complements it. So we would say things like, if you're going to have a federal budget and if you're going to purchase things, it should be fair and ethical, and we have to monitor how the money is spent. That's a legitimate thing. And Christianity is the voice of the conscience saying, do the right thing, do the golden rule, do unto others if others do unto you. I mean, think how powerful that idea is. If the people on this side, the politicians, would practice that, maybe they would have some respect for people's money, the tax money that they're spending. They'd be a little more careful in what they do and be more deliberate. Or if you declare a war, maybe the politicians should think about, well, those soldiers that are going to storm the beach, that's somebody's son or somebody's husband, and they're killing another Christian on the other side. Is that really the way you want to do it? We need to talk about it and negotiate it. So the voice of conscience and peace, that's what Jesus wants to do. And love your neighbor. This is what I want to talk about. All right. When you say love your neighbor, what does that mean? Love your neighbor does not mean that when somebody who is drug addicted or they're an alcoholic, they're a street person, you don't walk up to them and give them money. Why is that? Well, you are making their situation worse. Loving your neighbor sometimes means tough love. If you're a father or a mother, do you say to your kid, well, you don't have to go to school if you don't want. You can stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning and do whatever you want. You can come and go as you please. Is that love? Well, no, that's abuse. So love has a tough side to it. It means drawing boundaries and limits and telling somebody, no, you don't need money. You need to go and get counseling. You need help. I have a program. I have a shelter I can help you with. That's the role of the church. Again, meeting people's material needs that's not their problem. These people, they're not homeless. They're not less of a home. They need help over in this side of the equation. And that means tough love. It means setting limits. You have to check into the homeless shelter at 9 o'clock. You can't be drunk or high. We'll do your laundry. We'll give you a meal. We'll give you a safe place to sleep. And we'll give you counseling and places you can contact. That's tough love, and it's a beautiful thing when the church does that. When we do what we're supposed to do. In other words, everybody needs to stay in their lane. Right. So the church needs to stay in their lane and do the spiritual thing, which is a huge task, and the state needs to stay in their lane and do what they're supposed to do. And it's good order, protection of life, liberty, and property, execute true justice, due process of law, a court system, a jury system, right? It's a beautiful thing when the state functions the way it's supposed to, and when the church functions the way it's supposed to, and you have a balance in the world. And that's the two kingdoms ethic. I think it's a really helpful thing, and it builds on the Sermon on the Plain that we talked about, doing to others, have others doing to you. It builds on that concept, and it takes it to a higher level, a deeper level. And it's very difficult to do this on a Sunday morning. You really have to do a format like this to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly, and So thank you so much. I mean, that was, when you think about it, the way you described it, it's sort of obvious and not obvious at the
Yeah.
same time. And so bringing this to light, I think will cause a lot of our listeners to rethink their approach and so
That's
forth.
a good analogy. It's obvious, but it's not obvious. It's like deep down inside, you know that it's true, but you have to be woken up and say and have it pointed out to you. You know what the two categories are. It's a helpful way of looking at the world. Keep it in your lane. In other words, right.
We brought up a lot of really key and critical information today, but I think we would love it if you would drop some comments down in the podcast, because I'm sure a lot of what was said today might remind you of other topics that you would want to know about. Pastor Mark has that kind of background where we can get into that kind of information and maybe help you think through a few things.
Excellent.
So thank you so much for joining today. Don't forget to like this podcast and subscribe. We'd love that. We see that we're having viewers from all over the world, which is really very interesting. Romania even. Hello, Romania. So thank you very much and have a great day. God bless.